This is the Harvey Hour. My name is Nathan Harvey. It's great to have you in today on a Tuesday. As always, I'm joined alongside my dad, Stephen Harvey. How you doing today on this Tuesday?
Very good. Some interesting topics here tonight.
Gotta move close to the mic. Nobody can hear you.
First one is the Cincinnati Bengals.
Whoa, we haven't started yet. Conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, it's a beautiful day today. Kind of cold this morning, but nice this afternoon. And looking forward to talking about these four topics we have tonight.
Now you could jump into the topic.
Okay, thanks. Topic number one, the Bengals signing both Higgins and Chase. They've solidified their offense by signing wide receivers Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to substantial contract extensions. Chase agreed to a 4-year, $161 million deal with $112 million guaranteed, making him the highest-paid non-quarterback in NFL history. That seems to be almost a weekly event now, somebody getting that distinction. Higgins secured a 4-year, $115 million contract with the first 2 years guaranteed. Are you surprised, Nate, that the Bengals were able to get both Higgins and Chase signed?
I'm shocked, actually, genuinely shocked, because as everybody knows, this is the cheapest franchise, or one of the cheapest franchises in the NFL right now. To sign a guy for over $40 million per year, and then a wide receiver, too, making over $28 million per year to make him the highest paid wide receiver to ever in NFL history, and even potentially turning down $30+ million contracts from teams like the Patriots, who desperately need that true wide receiver one, who T. Higgins probably is, was massive for the Cincinnati Bengals. And now, because Jamar Chase and T. Higgins' cap hit now lowers because they signed these extensions, now they're turning their attention over to Trey Hendrickson to potentially sign him and do the trio, which Joe Burrow wanted initially. All the way back in December, he said that he wants to get all these contracts done, and during Super Bowl week, he was very adamant about getting these contracts done, saying that they desperately need to get all of their weapons, offense and defensive weapons, signed this offseason, because T. Higgins last offseason already requested a trade. Trey Hendrickson last offseason already requested a trade, and this offseason he requested a trade as well. So they had to sign their big name players, and they did with these two signings, as well as potentially not trading away Trey Hendrickson, who apparently their offers for other teams, their asking price is monumental, and no team is honestly taking them seriously with their price to Trey Hendrickson, that they may overcharge for Trey Hendrickson, so they retain him anyway. He's already signed to the Bengals already. He just wants out. He wants to get that extension. But now I think we have to realize that now most of the attention falls on Joe Burrow, because he's the guy that pushed for these signings. He's the one that said, I'll take less just to get these guys signed. And now they have the highest paid wide receiver too, and the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history on their current team right now. But obviously the issue is the defense. The defense was abysmal last year. Let's bring up the numbers here, because while their offense was insane, their defense was laughable. When scoring 33 points, they were 3-4, the only team in NFL history to lose 4 of those games when scoring 33 or more points. Everybody else, 79-77. That's basically a 92% winning percentage. So Joe Burrow in the offense wasn't the problem. Everybody knows it was the defense. We all know Jamar Chase, Triple Crown winner. T. Higgins had top 10 in receiving yards a game, receiving touchdowns, receptions per game. So they are both top 10 wide receivers in the NFL. But there's two main issues. It's obviously with the defense. The defense was abysmal last year. The 25th in points allowed last year. But also we have to realize that the offensive line for Joe Burrow has never been good. And last season, they were ranked 29th in pass blocking and run blocking. And right now, currently, Alex Kappa was the 71st rated offensive guard out of 77. Cordell Volson, right now, he's the offensive starting guard right now. He was 50th out of 77. Orlando Brown Jr., he was 66th out of 81st. Amarius Mims, after Trent Brown went down, he became the 76th. So back-to-back, 66 and 67. And then Cody Ford, who is currently on those, according to the projection, on the starting roster, he was 72nd out of 81st offensive tackles. He right now is moved to guard. So right now they have a massive issue on their offensive line. So if they could secure that up, which they haven't done since Joe Burrow got there, they're putting a lot of pressure on their first-time defensive coordinator after they got rid of the other one. Right now they're falling a lot on Al Golden. So if they could shore those things up, well, they already have their weapons in place for the foreseeable future. We're talking about 5-6 years from now. So they already have Joe Burrow signed on the massive contract. They have now their top 2 weapons. They brought back Mike Gesicki. So the offense has been fine. You could work on the running game, and you could draft someone. If somehow Ashton Genty's there, you could draft him. But there's also a bunch of running backs in this draft that you could draft. But the offense is secured. That was the best thing for you. Now it's just about how the hell are you going to build around that defense? Because right now you have the most expensive 1-2-3 punch combo in the NFL with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and now T. Higgins. So if you could secure that up, we'll see what the Bengals look like now. I believe they have the 9th hardest strength of schedule next season, this upcoming season. So we're going to see how they perform right now with a brand new DC and potentially a brand new slew of weapons, or defensive weapons, because their defense was garbage last year. So if they could do that, I'm not saying they go out and win the Super Bowl, but they should at least be somewhat secure. What do you think?
Well, I think that they have secured at least as good an offense as they had last year, which was pretty outstanding. But with this kind of investment, I think they have to expect that the offense will be even better. And Burrow thinks that he has another gear. He thinks he can shift up into another gear, and that remains to be seen. I think both receivers have wanted this long-term deals for several years, and they made a lot of noise about it. T. Higgins requesting trades 2 times, and Jamar Chase having his hold in where he went to the camp but didn't play, just hung out there, and I think that hurt the Bengals significantly in the beginning of the season. They got beat by the Patriots in the first game of the season. I think a lot of it had to do with the distractions from Higgins and Chase, who at the end of the day played in the first game of the year, but were they ready? I mean, they hadn't hardly practiced at all, and it showed. I mean, the Bengals got off to a horrible start, and I think that's what cost them the playoffs, because by the end of the season they were really playing well, and you saw Jamar Chase had the Triple Crown, which makes you think that, hey, the Bengals should have tried to get a deal done with him last year. They probably could have saved $20 million by signing him up before he had the Triple Crown win. Chase's annual salary, average annual salary now $40.25 million, sets the NFL record for non-quarterback compensation, as we mentioned, beating out Myles Garrett by $250,000 average salary per year. I think, as I mentioned, the deals prevent contract disputes from happening for the rest of the offseason now, and that was a distraction from them last year, which did occur for both receivers last year. Higgins requested a trade last year and then played under the tag. Chase conducted the hold-in and then ended the stalemate before the first game of the season. Joe Burrow now has the receiving weapons for at least 4 years if they continue to play well. Duke Tobin, director of player personnel, said at the Combine that the team desired to make Chase the highest paid non-quarterback, so they achieved that. We'll see how long it lasts. You had Crosby less than a month ago getting $35.5 million average annual salary. That made him the highest non-paid quarterback. Then Garrett topped that with $40 million a year just a week or so ago. And now Chase at $40.25. Who's next? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. It's a big hit to the Bengals' salary cap, particularly in future years. They have to hope that the cap continues to increase. 4 questions I think to consider here. What does this all mean for Joe Burrow? Bengals matched their $275 million investment in him by retaining his top wide receivers. He's got to be happy about that. They gave him what he wanted. Burrow had said it would be a disappointment if Higgins was not signed, and at some point the Bengals have to stop great players from leaving the building. Well, they achieved that. They had lost safety Jesse Bates last year. He wound up being an All-Pro with Atlanta. They lost DJ Reader to the Lions, and that had a very negative impact on their rushing defense. The deals put him in position to build on his MVP caliber season that he had this past year. Second question, can the Bengals afford to bring back Hendrickson? He's a 4-time Pro Bowler, asked for a trade for the second time, which was granted this year. He's still with the Bengals, likely because the high asking price, as you mentioned, likely a first-round pick. Probably not going to get that. Doesn't happen for defensive players very often. His production is much higher than his salary. He's currently 10th average annual salary for edge rushers. Will a team be willing to give up a high draft pick, as possibly a first rounder, and give him a salary close to Garrett's at $40 million? I don't think so. As you said, there's a possibility and a way to lower the cap hits now that the wide receivers are signed and keep.
Well, they already have. That was the thing about extending. It's not a way. They already did.
And keep him, but it will put a big squeeze on the rest of the roster, which I think is going to be a problem for them. What the rest of the league think about this? I think there was a surprise amongst the rest of the league trying to keep both of them. Now a salary, average annual salary for both of them out there is $70 million a year. That's way more than any other wide receiver pair in the league. With Burrow more than $100 million. With Burrow, that's more than $100 million on 3 players per year with no help for the defense. They could have saved the $20 million, as I mentioned, if they had extended Chase before his Triple Crown season. They chose not to do that. If they move Hendrickson, they'll have to focus on the defense in the draft. What does the return on investment look like here? Well, the Bengals, they'll field a championship passing attack, that's for sure. But they did that last year. They fielded a championship passing attack last year. It's just they played so poorly at the beginning of the season. They dug a hole so deep they couldn't get all the way out of it, although they came close. They didn't exceed the 2024. Can they exceed the 2024 performance where Chase won the Triple Crown and Burrow had the league high 40, almost 5,000 yards passing and 43 touchdowns? They were 8th in points per drive. They were 6th in TDs per drive. They'll need to improve on that further to justify this investment, I think, particularly in the fourth quarter where they were minus 28 differential last year. So they got to play better in the fourth quarter. I think there's more pressure on this trio of players and on Zach Taylor too, because he's the play caller. Does this make them a better team at the bottom? That's the end of the day. That's the question. I don't know. Maybe not, given how the offense performed in 2024, and they didn't make the playoffs. So,
hold on. Time out. So you're saying keeping the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, the number 1 wide receiver 2 in the NFL, somehow didn't make them better?
They were great last year. The offense
Jamar Chase has been great every year he's been in the league.
Yeah. So
T. Higgins has been arguably the best wide receiver 2
They maintained their core. They maintained the core.
Right,
did they make themselves better? Did they make themselves better? Why? Those guys, they all had great seasons. Can they do better than that?
Well, define great for wide receiver 2, but
wide receiver 2, Higgins, if you extrapolate his performance.
I would take Chris Godwin personally.
Extrapolate his performance. He was hurt part of the year. To the whole year, he had a fantastic year too. Can they do better than that? I guess if they stay healthy, if they all stay healthy.
I would personally take Chris Godwin at wide receiver 2. That's me. I still think T. Higgins is worth the money, absolutely. But here's one thing for you. What was your flip on the other page here? Flip the page back. Right here. That's the second point you made at the very top of the page about Trey Hendrickson. Can you read that for me again?
If they move Hendrickson, they will have to focus on the defense in the draft.
Right. And there was something about making keep going about Trey Hendrickson, because there was something about bolstering a defense, a Super Bowl caliber defense or something like that, if I heard you correctly there.
No, I didn't say anything about the Super Bowl caliber defense. I said they have Super Bowl caliber receiving core.
Correct, about that, right.
That's all they have, really. They don't have Super Bowl caliber anything else.
Right, and I could
a Super Bowl caliber quarterback and Super Bowl caliber receivers. And Gesicki plays very well with them, too.
You also talked about how Burrow could take another step up. I don't understand how
he thinks he could. He says he's the one that said that. He says he believes he has another gear.
Well, I hope that's just being more clutch in late games, because statistics-wise, he threw for 4,900 yards, 43 touchdowns, and only 9 picks, and 70% completion percentage.
He's got to play better in the fourth quarter.
He currently has the highest completion percentage amongst quarterbacks in NFL history. So I don't know how much better he could do in a career.
Well,
if
those
stats
don't tell the whole story. They didn't play that well in the fourth quarter. They were minus 28. They had some other negative stats there in the fourth quarter, too.
I can understand why, because they had to come back in nearly every game. They had 8 games. I think they had 8 games, they had 6 games of allowing under 20 points. If we increase that just first of all, the Steelers nearly had every single game where they gave up less than 20 points, 20 points or less. If you make it 24 points or less, I think the Ravens had 11 of those games, or under 24 points. The Ravens had 11 of those games. The Bengals, I believe, had 8. So the defense in their own division, it needs to improve drastically. You can't keep giving up massive scores to other teams and expect Joe Burrow to save you. But I do think that maybe this actually dings up Joe Burrow's case, where now the argument could be made, does he need these top-level receivers? Now, I disagree with that take entirely, but you could definitely make that argument now about how Hall of Fame quarterbacks tend to raise everybody's talent around him. And Joe Burrow's having to retain the number 1 wide receiver and arguably the number 2 wide receiver too in the NFL. You could also make that case. But you could also say, well, Joe Burrow never had a good offensive line. The defense has been average. And honestly, this is what I've said before. You just need a level of competency on defense because they've never had a top 10 defense since Joe Burrow's been there. In fact, they've had barely above an average defense during their best years when they made the Super Bowl, when they made the AFC Championship game and lost to the Chiefs. So if you just give them a level of competency, give him a chance to give him a shot at having even a fighting chance to win games instead of having to put it all on his back with basically no help, well, then that's exactly what that's a level of success that is sustainable because they did it in back-to-back years. When you take a look at it, their defensive backs are not that great. They're ranked in the bottom 3 defensive backs. When you have Awuzie out there, you have Kendall Fuller, you have Stephon Gilmore out there, you have Shaquille Griffin, you have Tre'Davious White. Here's one for you could try on for size, who's very young, who might not be demanding that much. Asante Samuel Jr. Now, the numbers, again, I'm a big numbers guy. He gives up about a 92.5 passer rating when targeted. That's not exactly what you would love to do, but at least it gives you some depth at the position because right now, like I said, your bottom 3 in cornerback group and your safety group also isn't very good at all.
They don't have a lot of money to go out and get free agents.
They have $28 million in cap space, which is 19th best in the NFL.
Yeah. So they maintained their offense as Joe Burrow wanted. They went out and signed both those guys to huge contracts, put themselves in financial constraints now if they want to retain Hendrickson. They did nothing so far for their defense and potentially lose Hendrickson.
Well, they added, I think, Oren Burks from the Eagles, who was a perfectly fine piece, a key piece of that defense. So if Oren Burks just sort of replicates what he did with the Bengals, that should add a level. I'm not saying it's going from missing the playoffs to winning the Super Bowl. You also have to deal with Jermaine Pratt, who requested a trade basically when the season ended. So if you could just convince him that, you know what, we're going to bring in talent, would you be able to stay? You might be able to convince him to stay. But right now, Jermaine Pratt wants out. Oren Burks is the only major signing that you have on defense. So maybe adding a cornerback or a safety, something like that. And obviously signing Trey Hendrickson back, maybe he'll take a slight hometown discount because you're building something here. And now that you have proved that you could secure at least the top 2, besides Joe Burrow, the top 2 threats on offense, maybe you can entice him to take a couple million less. I don't think he's going to make top of the market money. He's over 30 years old. I understand he just had 35 sacks in the last 2 years, but he's also 31 years old. You're not going to pay him $40 million per year. Mm-hmm. You could try to get him maybe at $30 million if you could somehow afford it per year. Because right now, guaranteed, I think Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, the first 2 years of each of their contracts are both guaranteed, which obviously is something that is good for them because they get the money basically instantly. So I think they'll be able to do Trey Hendrickson. I think they'll be able to. First of all, you need to draft better. They have the fewest amount of scouts in their own division. So you need to hit on your draft picks. That's why the Eagles keep spinning out guys repeatedly, going from great team to great team to great team every single year. Howie Roseman's a phenomenal GM, and he could afford guys like Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts and all this offensive lineman and the great defense. On top of that, a bunch of these guys are on rookie deals or they're super young anyway. So that's why you're able to crank out these phenomenal teams. If the Bengals can do that for 2 seasons, they will be competing for a Super Bowl in 2 to 3 years from now. but you have to hit on your draft picks. There's a couple good defensive guys early in this draft. If you could somehow trade up, which I don't think is going to happen whatsoever, but get a Will Johnson. If you trade up all the way, you can get a Mason Graham, which would be insane if you could put him on your defensive front.
You don't think that the ownership expects to compete for the Super Bowl this next year after they spent all this money?
Right now, you missed the playoffs 2 consecutive years. You're right now going for a playoff run, and especially with this defense, obviously, when you have Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and you know the amount of money that you're paying them, you obviously expect the Super Bowl because that's what every single top-tier quarterback is expected to do. Bring your team a level of success, bring them to the Super Bowl, at least have a very deep playoff run. We did that for 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles injury. We expect them to win the division and potentially win a couple playoff games, and they went 5-12. Joe Burrow just threw for 4,900 yards, 43 touchdowns, 9 picks, and also their top 2 wide receivers each had a passer rating when targeted at of over 121. So when you have those guys and the way that this offense played, they were 6th in points per game, you expect the offense to at least replicate that to a level. You expect the running game to improve because that was abysmal.
It's got to be at least as good. They have to be at least as good as last year. It won't be seen as a good deal. They have to they have to be better. They have to improve on what they did last year, which will be very hard to do. They have a new defensive coordinator. Maybe that will help their defense. But they need to strengthen the defense more, and their O-line is a problem, as you mentioned.
29th total offensive line.
So they've got a lot. They still got some holes to fill, and not a whole lot of money to do it with.
Well, that's why you have to hit on your draft base. You got to have guys on rookie deals, 4-year or the 5th-year option when you draft them in the first round. 4-year deals, hope they hit. Because if you don't hit, like Amarius Mims was your draft pick, I believe, last year. He was not a hit whatsoever in his rookie year. He was 67th out of 81st offensive tackles. Their offensive tackle group totally, out of 81 offensive tackles, they averaged the 68th best offensive tackle group in the NFL. Offensive guards, they were ranked 60th out of 77. So they were bottom 15, bottom 16 in the NFL last year. So it's bad. You have to fix that. You have to figure that out. Because right now your offensive line is still abysmal. Joe Burrow's never had a good offensive line. Your defense was above average at its very best. I think the highest defense you've ever had was 14th in the NFL.
In that year they had the Super Bowl run, didn't Burrow get sacked?
Correct. Jamar Chase broke free. Aaron Donald pressured him. If he had a half second more, the Bengals would have won a Super Bowl on a walk-off Jamar Chase touchdown. That'll probably be how that Super Bowl ended.
But during that playoff run, he got sacked an amazing amount of times in those games, like close to 10 times a game. It was really quite impressive that he was able to withstand that and still make it to the Super Bowl.
He was sacked 19 times in 4 games. It was bad.
Okay.
Let's get into our next topic.
Move on to our next topic here. The New York Giants. They continue their search for a quarterback, meeting with Jameis Winston today after previously sitting down with Russell Wilson and Joe Flacco last week. While they wait for Aaron Rodgers' decision, reports suggest that they've offered him more money than other suitors. However, Rodgers is holding out for the Vikings' decision before committing. With the 3rd overall pick in the draft, the Giants have a shot at selecting Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, depending on whether Tennessee or Cleveland both target quarterbacks ahead of them. What do you think the Giants should do with their quarterback situation?
I think when it comes down to it, you have the 3rd overall pick in this year's draft. Right now, you're begging and pleading. If you want a quarterback, let's say you miss out on Russell Wilson, let's say the Browns sign Russ, and let's say the Steelers or the Vikings sign Aaron Rodgers. Then you're stuck with Joe Flacco or Jameis Winston. At that point, I would just say, we have Tommy Cutlets, and we might have Joe Flacco as the surefire backup, sign him for a very, very cheap deal, and draft a quarterback, and then pray just because the Browns have Russell Wilson, they won't draft other Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. That's what you're banking on. You're hoping that they go out and get a Travis Hunter or an Abdul Carter. I know they have Myles Garrett, but why not add probably the best pure talent in this draft in Abdul Carter? So you're hoping that the Browns don't do that if you decide, or if you miss out on Rodgers and Wilson. Because I don't think you should go out there and start Joe Flacco. I don't think you should go out there and start Jameis Winston. Because at that point, you're just saying, okay, in 2026, everything will be brand new. The GM will be brand new. The head coach will be brand new. We'll have a brand new quarterback. That's essentially what that plan is. If you sign Russ, maybe you have the hardest schedule in the NFL next year. Maybe they could live one more year. But I really doubt it no matter what quarterback's out there. Whether it's Rodgers, whether it's Russ, whether it's Jameis, whether it's Flacco, does not matter to me. And I honestly think no matter what happens at the quarterback position for the Giants, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll will not be there next year. I think John Mara's had enough. I think the fans have had enough. They don't trust Brian Daboll after announcing that he's calling plays this prior year, and look what the offense turned into. Not a great offense whatsoever, and had a very good shot. If Drew Lock didn't have statistically the best quarterback game in NFL history, they would have had the first overall pick probably in this year's draft. So my guess would be if I have to give you an answer between these possibilities of these 4 quarterbacks currently in the NFL or a rookie, my answer truthfully would be you're giving Aaron Rodgers more money than any other team currently. And right now you're playing the waiting game with the Minnesota Vikings because Rodgers is extremely interested in that. You are, and by the way, I updated this list. You are one of only a couple teams that desperately need a quarterback. I think right now because they missed out on currently Russell Wilson, who apparently all the reports indicate that the Steelers don't want him anymore, and you lowballed Justin Fields, and apparently he didn't feel right about rejoining the Steelers, so he went with the Jets. Something felt off, supposedly. You have now moved into the quarterback needy teams from being a potentially needy team at the quarterback position. So right now it's the Steelers, Giants, and Titans. I understand that there's reports out there that the Titans are going to stick with Will Levis and give him every opportunity. I think we saw last year having to bring him in and then bench him and then bring him in and then bench him again for Mason Rudolph. You need a quarterback, clearly, or at least have a rookie quarterback there for competition. You have the first overall pick. You might as well draft a quarterback in this year's draft because why wait? You're going to be stuck with Will Levis or a Tier 2 rookie quarterback in this year's draft, which if it were last year's draft, it would probably be a Tier 4 quarterback, if we're going to be completely honest. So if I'm the Giants, I'm going to probably just bank on Aaron Rodgers coming. I understand it's not the ideal place for either side, but he's the best quarterback in free agency right now. Russ, I've said this now for 3 years. This will be the 3rd year. He's washed. He's not going to lead you anywhere. The last 5 or 6 games of the season, his offense averaged 14 points a game. You don't want that because the defense eventually caved. And honestly, Jameis Winston will be an interesting piece because he has that no-risk-it, no-biscuit type of offense that Bruce Arians instilled in him. But we do have to realize that he has the 3rd most pick sixes since entering the league in 2015 with 14. And also, he has the most interceptions throughout that span as well. So he's a very high-risk guy. He threw away the Broncos game. It was the Browns versus the Broncos, and he threw the game away with 2 pick sixes in that game. It was extremely ugly, but I also think he had 4 touchdowns. So a very high risk, decently high reward in my opinion. Honestly, and this might be crazy, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. If you could somehow get him, I would honestly pick Kirk Cousins because he's trying to find stable ground, and the Giants aren't stable right now. But at least he'd be wanted. The Falcons want him, but to be the backup, and he's still itching to prove that he's a starter. So that he might have, that motivation to still be a really good starter for an NFL team. The Giants might be a good piece. But right now, you're not going to go out there with Tommy Cutlets. You're not going to win around 8 games with Russell Wilson. You're not going to go out there and succeed with Jameis Winston or fossil Joe Flacco. You're not. And if you put a rookie in there, let's say they somehow get Shedeur Sanders. New York, Dion, Shedeur. I don't know how much that'll gel because then you're putting in a guy. It's like Caleb Williams going to New York. I don't know how much that would work. You want a somewhat humble guy. You want a guy who could take criticism and turn it into motivation. And I think Shedeur Sanders may be a good fit just based on talent alone. I'm not sure I think Deion Sanders could be the Jerry Jones, where he could be, subtle, passive-aggressive remarks at the team. I think he might chime in and pull an Eli Manning or, a Peyton Manning or something like that, a John Elway, where you come and say, yeah, we're not going to go there. I think that could come in. Whether it is the Browns, whether it is the Giants, that could be a potential option. But for me, no, I'm saying I'd go Aaron Rodgers. I don't think it's a good fit, but just get the best guy in free agency if you want to even have a shot, if you're Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, to retain your jobs for at least 2026 and beyond.
Well, John Mara said it after the season. He said quarterback is the number 1 issue for the Giants. I think that Rodgers is going to go to the Vikings if O'Connell wants him. That's what we're waiting for. And I think they're going to take their sweet time about making that decision. I don't think that there's any urgency on O'Connell's part. And the longer he waits, the more the opportunities for Aaron Rodgers to go elsewhere are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because these teams aren't going to wait. They're going to pursue other avenues, and there are some avenues that they can pursue. I think that the Giants situation, they have the number 3 pick. They may not have a shot at Ward or Sanders if Tennessee and the Browns draft quarterbacks. Rodgers, maybe he'll retire if he doesn't get the Vikings offer. We're going to talk more about him later in the show. Why would we want to play for the Giants? I don't know why he'd want to do that at this time in his career. Who will likely, they're not going to be contenders. They have the hardest schedule in the NFL. They have question marks on the O-line and defense. It could be ugly for him. I mean, does he want to be sacked 50 times next year? Is that what he wants to wind up ending his career, going 2-15 on a Giants team that's terrible, and he winds up taking a huge beating? Also, he risks being, if they wind up getting either of those 2 quarterbacks, Shador or Cam Ward, he risks being a bridge quarterback. If the Giants draft a quarterback and the season starts to not go well, which is likely, I think, given the Giants' schedule, he could risk just being, playing for 6 games, and then they sit him down and put a rookie in. That's what the fans will demand, and the Giants will have to give in to that, given we're in this huge, big market in New York. I think the Giants should trade up with the Titans to ensure they get one of those 2 quarterbacks. Bring in, Winston, Flacco, I don't know who, maybe Kirk Cousins, you mentioned him, that's a possibility. Those guys, the ones I mentioned, they would be bridge quarterbacks, except maybe for Cousins. And the rookie would either be Sanders or Ward. I think Sanders is a risk because going to the Giants is going to be tough the first year. His father is going to be making a lot of noise, and that's going to be in the media. And that's not going to be good. That's going to be a distraction. I think that I said this on a prior show. I think Wilson, despite the Steelers not really wanting him that much, I think there's a good chance he could wind up back there, particularly if Rodgers goes to the Vikings because of the Metcalf connection. They did very well together when Metcalf and Russ were with the Seahawks. Then Wilson could be an option for the Giants, but I think a poor one, and you agree that he's basically washed up. And he will likely, I don't know, maybe he'll wind up in Cleveland. And the outside looking in possibility is Kirk Cousins, but we're going to talk about Kirk Cousins next, so we can get into that in a little more detail.
Well, I do want to say when it comes to the Giants right now, they have the hardest schedule in the NFL for next year. They should have gone 2-15 for the season. Because, again, Drew Lock had statistically the best EPA per play out of any quarterback in NFL history against the Colts, and it was a stupid game that they somehow pulled off and won. Nobody, I know a couple of Giants fans, they were pissed that the Giants somehow pulled out that win against the Indianapolis Colts. So when it comes down to it, the expectation right now is Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen have to go in there with nervous anticipation that by week 6 they're going to be fired. Because everybody is expecting them not to retain their jobs next year. Some people thought they wouldn't retain their jobs this year. And I looked at John Mara saying we're going to keep him, and I trusted his word. And you know what? That turned out to be true. They were kept at least for this season. But that damn sure doesn't mean that they're going to finish out this season. So when I take a look at the Giants situation, their expectations when it comes to the head coach and the GM are, we're probably going to get fired by midseason. Because this roster is not built for 500. This roster is not built for playoff contention or deep playoff runs, and there's no way in hell, nobody on the planet can seriously argue that this team is a deep playoff contender or even close to being a Super Bowl contender. So what are your expectations? I understand people are going to look at, well, the defense is improved. And I agree. Your defensive back pickups were actually pretty good for the offseason when you had the lowest rated quarterback group entering last season. So you improved that aspect of it. But we just saw with the Las Vegas Raiders, I got ripped for saying that the Raiders are going to be a bottom 3 team in the NFL. And everybody's like, no, they're a 500 team and a playoff contending team. And you have to realize their division got better. The conference is insane. And oh wait, you don't have a quarterback. And your running back group is one of the worst, if not the worst, in the NFL. Let's take a look at the Giants now. Their defense is good, just like people told me the Raiders one was. And I agree. You do have some serious playmakers. Obviously, Lawrence and Burns. Thibodeau, Burns, all of them. You have good playmakers there. But the offense is without Andrew Thomas, who health is a concern. They went from having the 12th best offensive line in the first 6 weeks of the season to the bottom, to the dead last offensive line without him. So if you could secure that offensive line, which you haven't since Eli Manning was there, and about since 2014, I haven't looked at the offensive ranking numbers in a long time. I haven't since I did the Eli Manning not first ballot Hall of Famer argument. Since about, I want to say 2013, 14, the Giants haven't had a good offensive line at all. Like top 10, top 15 offensive line in the NFL. They haven't had that since probably, maybe even before then, to be honest with you. I'll take a look at my rankings, eventually. So if you could somehow just make the offensive line plausible, around middle of the pack, you still have no running game. Devin Singletary and Tyrone Tracy are not going to lead you to the promised land. You do have a phenomenal wide receiver one in Malik Neighbors, but no real number 2 threat. Wan'Dale Robinson is not a true number 2 threat. And I don't think Darius Slayton is not a true number 2 threat. So
Darius Slayton is a serviceable receiver.
No.
He's not bad.
But he's not like I said, he's not a true wide receiver 2 threat. So right now
you bring him back. They brought him back.
Yeah, they brought back Sterling Shepard to be a mentor piece. That doesn't mean his impact on the field was anything. It's the same thing with Darius Slayton. His impact on the field is not going to be something that you scheme around. You'll scheme around Malik Neighbors, and you'll probably double him up there. You also don't have any good tight ends. You don't currently have a quarterback. Your defense can be great. The Patriots' defense was ranked 7th in the NFL 2 years ago. They went 4-13 because they didn't have a stable quarterback situation. So the Giants' success heavily relies on who the quarterback will be. And if you don't have a stable quarterback situation, which you won't have with Jameis Winston, you won't with Joe Flacco, I think Russell Wilson's washed. You'll probably have a good couple games here. But when you really need him to be Russ, the let Russ cook era, never worked. Never worked in the NFL. People could, someone tried to rip on me for the let Russ cook era. He was never, by the way, a top 5 passer in the NFL in his entire career. Never a top 5 passer. The highest he ever got individually, I believe, was 6th.
He did win a Super Bowl.
Behind the number 1 defense, and arguably the number 1 defense this century.
He did make the Super Bowl twice. He lost the second one.
He also had the number 1 running game in the NFL.
He did throw the interception to Malcolm Butler.
So if you have the number 1 defense and the number 1 rushing attack, there's not much you really have to do. You're kind of just going along for the ride, making plays here and there. So regardless, the Giants are going to win a playoff game. They're probably not going to hover around 500. This is probably the worst situation to be in with a head coach and a GM on the brink of being fired, the hardest schedule in the NFL, no quarterback, no running game, and a defense you're hoping can pick up the slack. Sounds kind of like the Pittsburgh Steelers. 1 weapon, George Pickens. No great offensive line, Steelers. No real running game. Najee Harris rushed for 1,000 yards, but his impact was negated. They were also,
he's gone now.
Right, he's gone now. But I think they had a top 5 rushing attack in the NFL last year. The defense was great up until about midway through the season, and then they fell apart because they were the only thing really keeping the Steelers alive. And especially the last 5-6 weeks of the season, when your offense was averaging 14 points a game, the defense was giving up 30 because they were tired because the offense couldn't stay on the field. It's going to be the exact same thing for the Giants. The offensive line's not going to be great. Rushing attack will be basically nothing. You have 1 real threat, and right now you don't have a quarterback. This team's not going to win more than 6 games. And 6 games might be generous.
I think that's pretty generous.
That might be generous. So, to me, it doesn't really matter. Because right now, the quarterback situation, if it were me, I'd start fresh, knowing that if I'm John Mara, I'd be pressuring Joe Schoen. You're drafting a quarterback. Because behind the scenes, you're going to be fired in 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I don't care who you sign. You can sign any one of these 4 quarterbacks. Probably not Rodgers because he will probably fight for the starting job. And maybe that's exactly what you want. You draft a rookie, have Rodgers start the entire year. That could be a potential option for you.
It will never happen. It will never happen. Maybe they get Rodgers. I don't think he'd start the whole year because
they did that with Zach Wilson.
No, but the
and they did that with Tyrod Taylor.
The schedule is so hard, and the team is not that good. They're going to lose a lot of games, and the fans will be clamoring for the rookie to be in there to see what he can do. And so Rodgers' risk, I'm sure he's looking at that. He said, my risk of being benched here is very high, and I think it would happen. And that's not what he wants to go out in his last or next to last year to be benched.
What comes first? Brian Daboll and or Joe Schoen gets fired or Rodgers gets benched if the Giants sign Rodgers? What happens first?
I would say Rodgers being benched first would happen first. I would think that would happen first.
That's interesting.
And I'm not so sure those guys would get fired in midseason. The Giants have never done that. They don't
Neither
fire
had
people.
the Bears in their entire franchise's
maybe
history,
it's a
which
first.
dates
It
back
would
to
be a
what,
first.
1929.
It would be a first for the Giants to do something like that.
And to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me because there were already reports about them probably getting fired just this offseason as soon as the season ended. I didn't think that would happen, but there was expectations of that. And now you're going into a season where you have the hardest schedule. Your head coach and GM were just threatened to get fired, and now they're on the serious hot seat. You need to hit on your draft picks, and who knows what the Giants are going to do at the number 3 spot because you have an opportunity to go out and get Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or a quarterback or trade up or back depending on how aggressive you want to be. And it's just a question of this is not a phenomenal draft when it comes to quarterbacks. So if the Titans are convinced that the Browns are not going to go the quarterback route, they would obviously be more enticed to trade back, knowing they're probably going to get a quarterback at pick 3. And you could also get other draft capital. But it's not going to be the Bears-Panthers overhaul, because that was ridiculous. That was utterly ridiculous, that insane trade, which set the Bears up for success, long term. And, they're about to reap the benefits, in my opinion, this season and probably next season as well. So take a look at that situation. You also have DJ Moore, who his contract, compared to the rest of the other wide receiver contracts in the NFL, looks pretty cheap. But no, for me, you're taking a look at Rodgers. You're just playing the waiting game there.
Could be a long wait.
It could be. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I don't know if you probably aren't. We're probably not going to hear Giants make a move unless it's a non-Aaron Rodgers move, and then you would know that it's down to the Vikings trying to make a decision, Rodgers waiting for the Vikings, and the Steelers waiting for Aaron Rodgers. So we'll see. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but coming up, Kirk Cousins. A little bit of a controversy coming out of Atlanta past 2 seasons now. We're going to talk about that, as well as Aaron Rodgers now. There's a new report saying Rodgers could retire if the Brett Favre 2.0 career does not pan out correctly. We're going to talk about that right after this break.
Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. Stay safe on public Wi-Fi. Get NordVPN's special offer and encrypt your internet connection. NordVPN. Online security starts with a click.
Whether you're just discovering your voice or taking your show to the next level, you know what the world needs to hear. All you have to do is say it. With Spotify, set up your podcast. Your food podcast. Your mindfulness podcast. Your never thought you'd get this far podcast. And watch those sparks fly.
I put a picture of the comment.
Drop the episode anywhere people listen. And find out who they're cooking with. Where they're finding inner balance. And why they love your show. You're already a creator. Now you can create, connect, and get paid for your passion with one single free tool. Spotify for podcasters. Talk where the world listens.
Welcome back to the Harvey Hour. My name is Nathan Harvey. It's great to have you in today on a Tuesday. As always, I'm joined alongside my dad, Stephen Harvey. Let's get into our next topic of today's show, which is
The Falcons. The Falcons are keeping Kirk Cousins for now. After he secured a $10 million bonus for 2026. That had to hurt. That had to hurt the Falcons to give him that bonus. With a massive dead cap hit, releasing him just isn't an option. And Cousins has told owner Arthur Blank he wants to start elsewhere in 2025. And can you blame him? A trade is still possible. But according to ESPN's Adam Schefter, any move likely won't happen until the 2025 NFL Draft on April 26. Falcons believe that if they do trade Cousins, the acquiring team should absorb the $10 million roster bonus. That's a good incentive for somebody to want him, huh? Have to eat $10 million just to get him on your team. Cousins, who lost his job to Michael Penix Jr. after a late season slump, won't attend voluntary workouts. His future now hinges on whether quarterback-needy teams strike out in the draft, potentially reviving his trade market. What do you think about the Cousins situation, Nate?
I think right now this has been handled so poorly from literally the minute Kirk Cousins got there. Because after tearing his Achilles midway through the 2023 season, it kind of was like, okay, once they drafted J.J. McCarthy, the Kirk Cousins era was over. And so the Falcons went out, they signed him, and then 41 days later, after Kirk Cousins uprooted his family and moved to, I believe, where his wife's family currently resides, so it's kind of just like a hometown, we're going back home kind of a thing. 41 days later, they draft Michael Penix with the 8th overall pick in the 2024 draft. He was never informed that this is what the Falcons were going to do. So he was blindsided by this and clearly displeased from the moment he got there. He signed a 4-year, $180 million contract, and he currently has played 14 games, which means that, most likely, he'll have $100 million for playing 14 games. We're talking about bad contracts and how you handle quarterback situations, and this might be one of the worst of all. I think Deshaun Watson will forever be number one unless that somehow gets topped, and let's just say Dak Prescott just hits a massive cliff and falls off it. That might be the worst contract, signing the $60 million average annual value, and then he just plays poorly. But right now, Deshaun Watson takes the cake for that. But the Kirk Cousins situation is abysmal because now you're having a quarterback who's going to make $100 million guaranteed for 14 games, be the backup for a rookie quarterback, or now going into a year two quarterback. It's not great, but I think, honestly, it doesn't really matter that much because Kirk Cousins kind of did this to himself. You had a top 4 offensive line last year, and the offensive line wasn't great, but you didn't exactly help them out because you were a statue in the pocket. And then let's say, why did you get benched? Why did you get benched, Kirk Cousins? Well, let's take a look at the last 5 games you started of 2024. You had a 1-4 record, a completion percentage that's terrible. It's 62.7. The passing yards per game weren't garbage, but 236 is not that great. 1 touchdown to 9 interceptions. That should be a slash, not a apostrophe. But yeah, 1 touchdown to 9 picks, a passer rating of 63.8, and you averaged my glorious number that I rip on Russell Wilson for of 14 points a game. That's what your offense averaged in those last 5 weeks. So a lot of the blame falls on you. But I can understand why you want to find another home. The question is, though, if you do get traded, obviously the Falcons are going to pull right now what the Bengals are doing with Trey Hendrickson. Make the asking price so ridiculous and say, well, you're going to take on a massive part of Kirk Cousins' contract because he's going to be our backup. And right now you have the GM of the Falcons currently saying we're going to keep him as a backup. We have Terry Fontenot. He wants to keep him as the backup for Michael Penix. But who says that's not a massive distraction? Who says that's not actually a negative for Michael Penix? Because right now you have a guy who doesn't even want to be there, who before free agency already told his owner, I don't want to be here. And now you have a rookie quarterback who's played 3 games, who we don't exactly know what he'll become. And you're saying, well, it's the same thing with what you're talking about with Aaron Rodgers, where it's, what if Michael Penix doesn't start off so hot in 2025? Would fans be begging and screaming in the stands to start Kirk Cousins? Kind of what we heard from Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. We were in the stands during that Saints game where the offense was abysmal. The entire stadium was chanting Zappi. And during the Bears game, where Mac Jones' first game where he came back in 2022, everybody in that game was chanting Bailey Zappi. So could that be a situation? I don't think Michael Penix is the abomination of a Mac Jones or a Bailey Zappi in that situation. But it could be a situation where if Michael Penix starts off slow, Kirk Cousins, he's already voiced his displeasure with his situation in Atlanta. He could either force his way out, which I don't know if Kirk Cousins has the personality to go in and say, you know what? He reportedly already says he's going to miss out of non-mandatory, practices and training camp or whatever the case may be, off-season programs. But could he be the guy to sit out mandatory minicamp? Could he be the guy to sit out potentially games, regular season games, just because he wants out? And I think when it comes to this is the only way that's going to happen. I don't think the Falcons, unless a team blows them out of the water with a ridiculous, offer to them, which I don't think right now any team is willing to do that, unless the Giants get super desperate, unless the Steelers get super desperate, because let's be honest here, the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh, let's bring up this graphic once more. The quarterback situation in Pittsburgh right now is Mason Rudolph. The quarterback situation right now for New York is currently Tommy Cutlets, and the quarterback situation for the Tennessee Titans is Will Levis. The Saints have Derek Carr on a big cap hit, and the Browns currently have Kenny Pickett starting at quarterback 1. But Deshaun Watson, if he didn't tear his Achilles again, he would obviously be the starting quarterback, most likely, probably because they're spending a stupid amount of money on him. He would probably be the quarterback 1. So right now, you're really stuck with the Steelers, who have all eyes on Russell Wilson. You have the Giants, who right now are bringing in washed, old, and high-risk quarterbacks, and then Aaron Rodgers. And the Vikings right now, and Aaron Rodgers' entire career decision is currently reportedly residing on the Minnesota Vikings decision. So right now, the Kirk Cousins situation has been handled horribly, because you spent a bunch of money on him. You're giving him $100 million guaranteed to play 14 games. You have been adamant. You're not even like, that's the thing. It's not even like, okay, we're gonna see who's better in training camp or who's better in practice. This is Michael Penix is our starter, and we're spending $100 million guaranteed on a backup quarterback. So it's utterly ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a pretty big I agree with you. They've blown it totally. And their management is famous for making very poor decisions. So I think this is what's going to happen is they're going to take a huge risk and trade Kirk Cousins away. And that means that they're counting on Michael Penix to play the whole year. The sample size for him, a couple of games there, very small. Didn't get him into the playoffs like they were hoping. He did play reasonably well. He didn't play any worse than Kirk Cousins played down the stretch. He deserved to be benched. But you're going to go with Michael Penix, guys? He's had like 2 or 3 games, a sample size here to see whether he's your guy. He passed for under 1,000 yards, and you're going to put him out there and be the starting quarterback for the whole year and who's your backup going to be now? I don't know. Joe Flacco? Maybe. I don't know. Who's it going to be? We don't know. So I think it doesn't make sense, and it's a risk, but I don't think it doesn't make sense for Atlanta not to trade Cousins. They benched him late in the season, as you said, hoping Penix could push them to the playoffs, and he nearly did it with a performance that was at least as good as Cousins, as I mentioned. When the season starts, Penix will be on the field and Cousins will be elsewhere. I think that's what we're ultimately going to see. I think this is a smokescreen that they're putting up. That they want to hang on to him when they see these other teams out there. Somebody's going to want him, I think, before it's all over. When the musical chairs stop between Rodgers and Wilson, it could mean neither is available for the Giants. So maybe Kirk Cousins is headed there. Dable and Schoen, not anxious to start a rookie for sure, because it will likely cost them their jobs, which probably is going to happen anyway, as we've said. Cousins might be the answer for the Giants. He's unhappy. He wants to be traded, and can't be a backup quarterback for $40 million a year. That just doesn't happen. And so I'd say trade him now, save $2.5 million in cap space. Trade him after June 1st and save $27.5 million in cap space. It makes a lot of sense. If he's traded to the Giants, he would make $27.5 million, and they have Neighbors, Slayton, and Tracy for him to throw to. So that's not great. Maybe Neighbors is great, but they're going to double team him probably. I think Slayton is. I mentioned. I think he's a little better than you think he is, and he's had some big plays for the Giants in the past. So it's not terrible, and he'd be in a place where he was wanted. At least he'd be the starter. With him, they could select the best available player or trade back for additional draft capital. Maybe they pass on a quarterback this time around, and they do it next year. The Giants would be more appealing than backing up at Penix in Atlanta, that's for sure. He might want assurances that the Giants won't draft a quarterback at number 3 if the Giants consider making him an offer.
I'll say this: we have to. I completely forgot about this, but now it's coming back to me. Remember when we were talking about who's playing in the preseason, and Kirk Cousins says that he asked if he could play,
right? And they wouldn't let him.
Raheem Morris said, "Either we never had that conversation, or we were not playing him." But yet Kirk Cousins wanted to play in the preseason because he was just coming off an Achilles injury, and that Week 1 game against Pittsburgh was probably the ugliest, besides what we saw in the last 5 games, But that was one of the ugliest games I've ever seen Kirk Cousins play. He was a statue in the pocket. The offensive line didn't hold up. The communication was way off. Kirk Cousins did not seem comfortable. People were analyzing, how is he dropping back in the pocket? Or actually, no, he didn't. I think he took 97% of his snaps from the shotgun, but it's how is he structuring his throws? His footwork is terrible. He had no ground.
He had no practice, and they didn't let him play.
Right. He had no comfortable game playing at all because he didn't play in the preseason.
He did have some good games during the year, though. There were some games that were good.
There were two good
games against Atlanta. Against the Buccaneers,
correct.
right?
The overtime game. He had
game against
400
Dallas.
yards.
Game against Dallas was good, right? So he had some games that were
And now
good.
supposedly, I completely forgot about this. Cousins said after week 10 that he banged up his right shoulder. He was doing the right elbow and right shoulder injury. You know what the Falcons said? No, he ain't. He was on the injury report after week 10, cleared to play in week 11, and didn't play. It wasn't on the injury report for the rest of the season. But he was saying, I'm hurt. So I don't even know who to believe. Because I think some things where...
I would believe him, actually, because just given the way the Falcons have been in recent years...
But you don't like them also because Bill Belichick.
I do. I don't like them. I
over.
screwed Bill Belichick, and I don't like that.
I think right now, the way that the Falcons have handled this is abysmal. Not informing a quarterback 41 days after you just signed to a 4-year, $180 million deal. You're going to give him $100 million to play 14 games. You draft a rookie quarterback, 8th overall, shocked the NFL world. And right now, you're not even saying, okay, we're going to put the best quarterback out there for 2025. We're saying we're starting this now year 2 guy who played 3 games.
Yeah.
And we're allowing a $100 million guaranteed quarterback to be their backup. And the GM said he's very comfortable with Cousins being the backup.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be there. I guarantee if Kirk Cousins had this personality, he truly wanted out, he would become a distraction for Atlanta.
He will.
And I think honestly,
if they don't trade him.
Most people would take a look at that situation and say, rightfully so. They screwed him over from literally a month after he got there.
I know. I agree 100%. We were shocked that they drafted Penix when we talked about after the draft.
Yeah.
We said, what were they thinking about? What are they doing?
Right.
Yeah. And now it's snowballed. It's a bigger problem. It's even bigger problem now.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
get to our final topic here.
Let's move on to our final topic. On Saturday, Mike Silver, Diana Rossini, Alec Lewis of The Athletic wrote that Aaron Rodgers prefers to sign with the Vikings instead of the Giants and the Steelers, but reportedly could choose retirement if the Vikings turn Rodgers down in favor of J.J. McCarthy as their starter in 2025-26 season. Should Aaron Rodgers retire, call it a career, and retire, Nate?
I think this is interesting. I think it really is. But even what I find more interesting is that besides the Minnesota Vikings, let's say the Steelers, let's say we go back about 2 weeks and really the Steelers are the only team that Rodgers is favored to join in the 2025 season. We now have a second Steelers player who's coming out and is frustrated with Aaron Rodgers. And this time, it's not a lowly safety. It's a foundation of this franchise in Cam Hayward. This is the quote that he had on his podcast, Not Just Football. I ain't doing that darkness retreat. I don't need any of that crap. Either you want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler or you don't. That's simple. That's the pitch. If you want me to recruit, that's the recruiting pitch. Pittsburgh Steelers, if you want to be a part of it, so be it. If you don't, no skin off my back. You have a foundational piece of the Pittsburgh Steelers also pissed off, or at least frustrated with the fact that Aaron Rodgers is waiting for the Minnesota Vikings to make a decision, which I always thought, and I think Aaron Rodgers even said it, he doesn't want to do the Brett Favre 2.0 career arc. Well, that's exactly what's happening, because he started 1 year with the New York Jets. Now he's going potentially, and he says he wants to play 2 more years, and if the Vikings sign him, who knows if it'll be 2 years, but let's just say it is. That's an exact carbon copy of Brett Favre, who started 1 year with the Jets and 2 years with the Minnesota Vikings. So I'm not sure exactly what Rodgers wants. And supposedly he wants Sam Darnold money. I don't know if they're going to give a quarterback who played okay but not great on a 5-12 team $35 million. Or at least 33.3 if you want to give him the Baker Mayfield deal. I'm not sure any team would want that unless they're desperate and need a quarterback, which, again, let's bring up the graphic here. I don't know if any of these teams are desperate. They definitely need a quarterback, but I don't know if any of them are desperate because it looks like the Steelers are okay with going Mason Rudolph. The Giants, they're in position to draft a rookie quarterback. The Titans are in position to draft a rookie quarterback. The Saints, for at least this season, have Derek Carr, and the Browns still have Deshaun Watson. If not, they have Kenny Pickett or Russell Wilson. So right now, none of these teams desperately need a quarterback. So Rodgers right now is stuck because according to this report, he could be considering retirement if the Vikings say no to Aaron Rodgers. And let me ask you this, general public and even you, Dad. Take a look at the recent history of Aaron Rodgers. How many teams have said no to him? Because I don't think it's ever been one. At the very end of the Packers' tenure, Diana Rossini came out with a report that Rodgers is asking for a 3-year contract with $50 million per year guaranteed. Rodgers denied that report. Well, I think a couple of weeks later, he signed a 3-year, $150 million deal, I think with all of it or most of it guaranteed. Basically, what Diana Rossini reported. So Diana Rossini is someone who I trust when something comes out like this, probably 8 to 9 times out of 10, it's at least mainly accurate. Maybe not every minute detail is exactly accurate, but a majority of it is. So when something comes out about this where Rodgers is mulling retirement if the Vikings don't sign him, I could completely believe that. And honestly, he should. Because, again, people get mad when I say this. If Rodgers has another bad year, or at least an average year with the Minnesota, let's say he does go to the Minnesota Vikings, and with them just going 14-3, with Sam Darnold at quarterback, who for his entire career has been passed around, said he was seeing ghosts, and was a journeyman quarterback, then goes to the Minnesota Vikings, has a 14-3 season, puts up career-best numbers, and makes his first playoff game, albeit he plays terrible in Week 18 and that first wild-card game. He still led the Minnesota Vikings, who are projected to be a bottom team in the NFL because of the fact that they were projecting to start Sam Darnold. He played incredible. They led to, like I said, 14-3 record. If Rodgers has a middle-of-the-pack year and does worse than Sam Darnold, and also doesn't play that well, I think that should ding him for his career, prowess. Because that means he had a middle-of-the-pack year last year with the Green Bay Packers. He had a 5-12 season with the New York Jets. And let's say he has a 7-10, 8-9 record with the Minnesota Vikings next year. How can we sit up here and say that Rodgers is still a top-tier quarterback? Because historically, he's made it to one Super Bowl, has never made it back, has a losing playoff record since that Super Bowl, and the only thing that he has left for him is not dominance throwing the football. It's not putting up 40 touchdowns and 6 picks. But that's all he has left is that touchdown-interception ratio, which is number one in the NFL. It's over a 4-to-1 touchdown-interception ratio. He's not dominating the NFL. Peyton Manning was on cruise control, but he already had the numbers up to that point. That last season with the Broncos, they put in Brock Osweiler for a majority of that season. And their defense was the reason why they won that Super Bowl. Tom Brady was very dominant, and the last year he was good enough to lead them to the playoffs. He had a couple nice comebacks, but the team wasn't great, and Brady himself wasn't that great. So Rodgers right now only has his touchdown-to-interception ratio. That's all he's got going for him. He's not winning any MVPs. He's not being runner-up for MVP. He's not winning Offensive Player of the Year. He's not leading the league in touchdowns or the fewest interceptions or the most yards or the highest completion percentage. He's got none of that. All he has is playing conservative football. So I think right now, if there's even a chance that the Vikings don't offer him a contract or they lowball him, I think he should retire. Mm-hmm. Call it a career. Because I think that if you play poorly or play average, and then people say, you know what, Sam Darnold went 14-3, why can't you go at least 14-3? I think that puts a lot of pressure, and that all of a sudden makes Aaron Rodgers become the savior, which at this stage in his career, we saw him with the Jets. He cannot be the savior anymore.
Okay. Should Aaron Rodgers retire if he doesn't get the Vikings job? I would say no, only if he could then land the Steelers job, because the Steelers are a pretty quality team as well, and they made the playoffs last year, and I think that they probably have a pretty decent shot to make the playoffs again. I'd say at his age, he has to go to a contender. If if it makes no sense for him to go to the Giants, have another losing season, and get sacked 50-plus times. If that is all that's left for him, then I definitely think he should retire. Playing the waiting game and pushing the Giants and the Steelers to other options, maybe what he wants, so he can just decide to retire if the Vikings don't want him. The Vikings' decision may not happen for weeks. Nobody really knows anything right now. And until further notice, the reporting and speculation is not going away. So we're going to be continuing to talk about this the longer it's out there. Do the Vikings view Rodgers as the missing piece that could put them over the top? They should be careful because that's what the Jets thought he could do for them.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. He can't go to a place and be the savior. If you're going to the Giants, not only are you trying to make the Giants a stable franchise and be the savior of them on the field, you're also saving two guys' jobs with Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. So you're trying to make the Giants relevant again, or at least competent again, and you're trying to make sure Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen can't get fired. So you're saving three aspects of the New York Giants. If you go to the Pittsburgh Steelers, you'll be needed through the second half of the season because the defense will do its job in the first half. The second half, they will get tired, and that's the entire mantra of the Pittsburgh Steelers: a tough defense and trying to run the football. And at least with Arthur Smith, that's what it was, because I think they had the third most rushing yards in the NFL. So I think for the first half, you should be on cruise control.
I think the Steelers blew it not taking Justin Fields and giving him a new contract.
They lowballed him.
They lowballed him, and he wound up with a better deal, but he may not be too happy being with the Jets. I think they had better coaching, better stability in Pittsburgh. The Jets is a total unknown now, the complete overhaul.
Right. But we asked the topic on Friday, I think, can Rodgers still be a top-tier quarterback? And my answer is no. In fact, he's about an average to below-average quarterback. Let's bring up the graphic here. Out of qualified quarterbacks since 2022 with minimum 500 pass attempts, 31st in record, 27th in completion percentage, 23rd in passing yards per game. He's 19th in touchdown-interception ratio, and his passer rating is 23rd.
Pretty bad.
So he's not a
pretty
great
bad.
Anymore. He's not a great quarterback anymore, and that's also with Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall and what used to be the number one graded defense in the NFL from 2023 entering 2024. And then they were not a bad defense through the first 5 weeks, and then you decide to fire Robert Saleh because Woody Johnson got mad. Rodgers sucked against the Vikings overseas. He got embarrassed sort of on his own home turf there, and you know what? Let's fire the head coach, and let's promote Jeff Ulbrich. Why not? How about Nathaniel Hackett being the play caller? Maybe that was the issue. Just going to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Todd Downing did a fine job. In fact, Rodgers from week 8 to week 18, the numbers increased pretty nicely. 18 touchdowns to 4 picks. He went back into the Rodgers mentality of having a really good touchdown-interception ratio. Meanwhile, the first 7 games, it was very ugly. I think it was 7 touchdowns, or it might have been 10 touchdowns, 7 picks.
Yeah.
So Rodgers is a good quarterback. He's an average to good quarterback depending on who he's playing. Because against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had a terrible passing defense, him and Devontae Adams went off. Now, again, they nearly lost to Mac Jones leading that offense, who had one dynamic playmaker, but the defense was abysmal. So the fact that you went down to the wire with that, and I believe, didn't they also lose to the Patriots, if I'm not mistaken, late in the season?
Yeah.
With Drake May at quarterback, with the worst offensive line and not a great defense, and with no skill position players.
Yeah.
It's not a great look when you do that. And you also, and reportedly, do I have it here? I wish I did. Maybe I don't. Hopefully I can bring it up very quickly. There was an AFC executive that supposedly played Rodgers late. And I want to bring this up because I think personally, for me, it's massive. And if I can't get it, that would be terrible. Here we go. So supposedly, there was an unnamed AFC executive that played Rodgers late that says he still has flashes of arm talent and accuracy. There's a depreciation of the mobility that made him great when he was a two-way run-pass option on every play. It's relegated to him being a more pocket-passing veteran. Do I think he can start for a year? I do. He sees the field well.
I saw that.
His football intelligence, the quick release. His arm's not quite what it was, but with the right surrounding cast, yes. Well, I think Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson was a pretty damn good supporting cast. But then Garrett Wilson literally requested a trade if Rodgers would have stayed. How does that really sound about Rodgers being everybody says the first ballot Hall of Famer, that the number one weapon on your team was going to want out if he stayed at the quarterback position.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's because he favored Devontae Adams once he came over. Yeah.
But now that Devontae Adams is out of the question, I think it would honestly, retirement might be the best option just for it to be like, okay, I played poorly. Can I really regroup and regain, some dominance in the NFL? And the answer is maybe to no. Then why play? Because I do think that this does affect your legacy, just like Russell Wilson. If he keeps putting up dud 500 record numbers, and when he's relied upon putting up 14 points a game, first of all, and I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to say it for years on end. When he was relied upon, he was a bottom 10 passer in the NFL. How is that Hall of Fame status? He's not a Hall of Famer. So people saying that he's a Hall of Famer for being carried by the number one rushing attack in the NFL and the arguably the greatest defensive grouping in the 21st century in the Legion of Boom.
The Legion of Boom.
I don't understand how that's Hall of Fame worthy. That's why I think right now Daniel Jones had a bigger market than Russell Wilson. Joe Flacco. Russell Wilson is now on the level of Joe Flacco.
Yeah.
And Jameis Winston.
Well, he's getting old.
He literally has one team that seriously wants him, and that's the New York Giants and maybe a hint of the Cleveland Browns.
I thought the Browns were interested.
A hint of the Browns. But the Browns are the number 2 overall pick.
I don't think the Browns...
And you think they're going to draft a quarterback anyway?
I do. I
don't
don't
think...
they
really want Russ.
But I don't think...
He left without an offer.
I don't think they're going to start Kenny Pickett, though. I'd be very surprised if they do that. If they draft Shedeur Sanders, maybe, because they'll say Pickett's going to be out there for 3 games and then Sanders is going to come in.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like,
maybe Russ doesn't have a home.
That's what I'm saying. Russ went to the Browns and left without an offer. He went to the Giants, left without an offer. Joe Flacco went in there, one team. Jameis Winston went in there, one team. And honestly, Jameis Winston has more credibility for the New York Giants than Russell Wilson does because he asked Saquon Barkley at the Super Bowl what team he should go to, and Saquon recommended the Giants. So he already has a letter of recommendation from Saquon Barkley to go to the Giants. Russ has what? The Steelers don't want him anymore. Mike Tomlin fought for him, and now apparently doesn't want him. Arthur Smith reportedly had an issue with him that they were fighting through the entire season. And he went to the Browns, left without an offer. Went to the Giants, left without an offer.
Makes you wonder if he does get an offer, what kind of salary it will be. It doesn't have to be too much.
It better not be high.
It can't be. It doesn't have to be, right? Nobody really wants him.
I think right now, the fact that this is even a report means more likely than not that it's somewhat true. Like probably 80% true.
Really?
And I think, this is literally the Brett Favre 2.0. That's what Rodgers has become. Brett Favre 2.0. Around 40 years old, going to Minnesota, trying to be dominant.
He winds up doing that, following Brett Favre from Green Bay to the Jets to the Vikings. That'll be pretty interesting. And if it plays out the way it did for Brett Favre, then, Rodgers would have a great year with the Vikings.
Well, that first season in Minnesota.
Take him to the NFC championship game.
Hopefully he doesn't
throw an interception to lose the game.
Cross-body pick. Yeah, that's probably not a good idea.
That's terrible.
But honestly, the way Rodgers plays in some of these late games wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Rodgers is not clutch. I mean, just look at this past season. Against the Miami Dolphins wasn't clutch. Against the Minnesota Vikings wasn't clutch. He was complaining about Mike Williams in a particular way he should run this route. He got him shipped off to Pittsburgh. I mean, if we're talking about pure talent, there's only two
Mike
teams.
Williams is hoping that Rodgers doesn't wind up there. Yeah. The Steelers.
I mean, I don't think Mike Williams is a home right now. So I think to answer the question, should Rodgers call it a career and retire? I don't think he wants to. But if this report is true and the Vikings are like, you know what? We've been squeamish on J.J. McCarthy. It's time to finally give him the keys. He went through a season of Sam Darnold and people being shocked by him. He's coming back from an injury. He looked phenomenal in the preseason game. Let's hand the keys over and see what the kid could do. If they do that, Rodgers has the Pittsburgh Steelers, who now 2 players have come out and been frustrated about his decision. One just said keep his ass retired. That was the first thing. The safety said that. And then Cam Hayward saying, let's go, buddy. If you want to be a Steeler or not, just make up your damn mind.
Yeah.
And then the Giants are like, we'll offer you a bunch of money. You may be benched, you may not be, but we need you to save a couple jobs.
It'll be interesting to see how mercenary he really is. If he doesn't get the Vikings job, whether he'll take the Giants, and he doesn't want to go to the Steelers because they lowballed him, then he does want to continue playing, then it will be because of the money, and he'll go to the Giants.
But then it's just the same career that he's already had. Asked for a bunch of money. The team doesn't really do anything. You can get about $500.
You have a lot of money. You can afford more ayahuasca retreats.
I think that does wrap up today's show. We thank you so much for the constant support. As always, a lot to talk about. Free agency is basically over. I'm sure we'll do some rankings, some predictions, something like that over the next couple weeks. Maybe on Friday we'll do something here. But for this episode of the Harvey Hour, my name is Nathan Harvey. That's my dad, Stephen Harvey. We have been your hosts of the Harvey Hour. Catch us Friday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube.
Night, Grandpa.
Using Wi-Fi without NordVPN could mean sharing your private stuff with more people than you think. Stay safe on public Wi-Fi. Get NordVPN's special offer and encrypt your internet connection. NordVPN.